All right, so now we're moving on to chapter 3 and section 3.2, which is going to be the measures of central tendency. All right, this section is actually going to be broken up into a bunch of different videos. I think it'll just be easier just to do each topic within this section its own video. So this is going to be a lot of different videos. Remember, the essential question, something that you guys need to focus on throughout the entire unit is if two products have the same mean, how can you find which is better? And how can you tell if your grade was good compared to others? All right, so let's get into the first part of this section, which is going to be finding the mean, something I'm sure that you all have learned before. But before we do that, there's just a couple things a couple terminology that I want to discuss with you first. All right, and that is the difference between a statistic and a parameter. So a statistic is a characteristic or measure obtained by using the data values from a sample. Right? So in a statistic, we're using a sample, whereas a parameter is a characteristic or measure obtained by using all of the data values from a specific population. All right? So if we're dealing with the sample, then we're dealing with our statistics. If we're dealing with everything within the population, then we're dealing with the parameter. All right? There's something you'll need to be able to differentiate throughout this chapter and throughout the rest of the year. All right, so if we want to find the mean of something, the mean is the sum of the values divided by the total number of values that we have. So it's really easy. However many values we have, we add them up, and then we just divide by the total number that we do have. So if I gave you the numbers, say 5, 20, 7, and 4, and I asked you to find the mean to these, first we would do 5 plus 20 plus 7 plus 4, which is then equal to 36. And since we have 1, 2, 3, 4 numbers, we would take that 36, we would divide it by 4. So that means our mean between these 4 numbers is 9. All right, so if you're asked to just find the mean in general, I think it's something that you all can do currently, and it's not something that's difficult. All right, but now we're going to talk about how we can find the mean when we have a grouped frequency distribution. So we know that our group frequency distribution could look something like this, where we would have had our class limits here, and then our class boundaries, and then the frequency, how many they occur. Right? So if we want to find the average of our grouped frequency, there's a few steps that we have to take. And the first thing that we have to do is we need to find the midpoint of our class boundaries or our class limits. So it's exactly what we would do as if we were graphing our frequency polygon. All right, so we would do 5 and if we have our class limits, we can use those as they might be easier, but we would do 5.5 plus 10.5, and we would divide that by 2, so this would then give us 16 divided by 2, which is equal to 8. So we know that this midpoint is equal to 8. Then we would do 10.5 plus 15.5, divide this by 2, so that would then give us 26 divided by 2, which is 13. And we would go in and fill the rest of this chart in for the rest of these class limits or class boundaries so that it will look something like this. All right, so this is what our chart or our table would look like after we find the midpoint for each of our class boundaries or our class limits, whichever one you want to do. All right, now, after we find each of these midpoints, there is then one more column that we have to add to this table. And that is where we will multiply the number of frequency that we have times the midpoint. So in this case, we have one frequency with the midpoint of 8, so 1 times 8 is equal to 8. And we got that by multiplying our frequency times our midpoint. Here we have 2 and 13, so 2 times 13 is equal to 26. Here we have 3 times 18, because we had a frequency of 18, midpoint was 18 with a frequency of 3. So 3 times 18 is then going to give me 48. 54, so let me just erase it, so 54, and then you would go on and fill in the rest of this chart by multiplying our frequency by our midpoint. All right, so if we want to find the mean in our grouped frequency distribution, this is the steps we have to do. Step 1 is we have to find the midpoint of each of our frequency, or of each of our class boundaries or class limits. 2, we have to then multiply our frequency by the midpoint, and our chart or table will look something like this. All right, so that was multiplying our frequency by our midpoint. Then what we do is we take all of these points that we just got, our frequency times our midpoint, and we add them together. So we add them up, and that's 490 that we got. And then we take that number and we divide it by the total number of frequency that we have. So here is our frequency, 20. So that means this 490 is being divided by 20. And this is then equal to 24.5. So that means that the mean or the average for this grouped frequency will be 24.5. Right? So that's how you would find your mean when you're dealing with a grouped frequency distribution. And that is it for this video.